Hello, I'm Henry Peden. Welcome to another program in the series of Harford's Heritage. This one addresses some products that were made in Harford County and dispensed in a bottle or a jar.
Greetings, I'm Jack Shagner. Early settlers found their way to present-day Harford County about 1660 and brought with them the necessities of pioneer living on the emerging frontier.
This included iron tools for the construction of shelters and outbuildings. Also among their possessions were glass and pottery containers to store and preserve food or drink.
Each region of Harford County contained soil fostered by an environment that best grew specific products, which were desired in other nearby areas. Our story is narrated by longtime radio personality R.C. Allen and begins with winemaking.
In 1797, John Adlam purchased land along the upper Chesapeake Bay that had previously been known as Brothers Lot, Wilton Farm, Greenway Farm, Allenwood Farm, and today is a Harford County property called Swan Harbor Farm. Adlam was from Pennsylvania, where he had served in the Revolutionary War. He worked as a surveyor and presided as a judge. He became one of the foremost horticulturists of the colonial period and specialized in making wine from Native American grapevines. In 1809, Adlam sent a bottle of Burgundy wine to his friend Thomas Jefferson, who was so impressed that he purchased 165 cuttings from Adlam to be planted at Monticello. At Jefferson's mountaintop Virginia estate near Charlottesville, he had a vineyard as well as a wine cellar in the basement of his dwelling. In 1823, Adlam published a memoir on the cultivation of the vine in America and the best mode of making wine. Writing about August 1822, he revealed, "I made a wine of the Schuylkill Muscatel near Havre-de-Grace, where the vines grow on a rich, loamy, well-manured soil, which is declared equal to the best wine of France." This endorsement was the result of a blind taste test with a group of wine enthusiasts, but Adlam confided the wine grapes had matured earlier than normal and allowed to stay on the vine, losing moisture and shrink, thereby enhancing the flavor. Wine from crops in preceding years had not yielded such outstanding results.
The manor at Mount Felix was built about 1850 by successful canner and agriculturalist John Mitchell on a high elevation west of Havre-de-Grace that afforded a beautiful view of the confluence of the Susquehanna River and Chesapeake Bay. Historical architect James Wolin described the home as a true mansion, being of a thoughtful and regular design, its details symmetrical, its features evenly spaced. In 2006, Peter and Mary Ionello purchased the 14-acre property, cultivated a vineyard, bottled wine, and currently provide tours, tastings, and a venue for special occasions. The superior quality of the soil on the southeast-oriented slopes, planted with ecologically high-density vines, illuminated by long sunny days and cool autumn nights, produce sweet juices that yield fine wines for fun, family, and friends. Mary and Peter named some of their wines to reflect the rich heritage of the Upper Bay region. John Adlam's first is a full-bodied Cabernet Sauvignon. Mitchell's Manor is a lush Chardonnay. Lafayette's Reserve is a medium-bodied Merlot. O'Neill's Bravado is a semi-sweet Chambourcin. And Matilda's Devotion has classic Sauvignon Blanc aromas.
In 1977, Rose and Mike Fiore, along with their family, established a small 14-acre farm in the northern part of Harford County near Pilesville. They populated the land with horses, cows, pigs, goats, and a large garden that was expanded to include 50 grapevines. Mike had plans to make some wine, and discovering the soil was ideally suited for growing grapes, he planted 2,000 vines of a white French hybrid on a 2-acre hill facing southeast. He named it La Facette, roughly meaning the happy place, and introduced other varieties that fostered a wine-producing business. Peoria offers fruit fusion wine in flavors of blackberry, dragonberry, apple, peach, and pomegranate. In the category of varietal wines, they bottle, among others, Cabernet, Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Merlot, Pinot Grigio, and Vidal Blanc. Relating closest to Harford County is Fiore's Scenes of Maryland wine that celebrate the various areas of the state. Mike's grandson, Tony, describes these favorites.
Welcome to Fiore Winery. Today I'd like to take you through some of our Scenes of Maryland wines. First, this is the Racetrack Red. This is our estate-grown Chambourcin wine, and we blend this with a little bit of Moscato to soften it. So this is a light, raspberry, very drinkable kind of wine, perfect for pizza night. Next up, we have our white blend. This is L'Ambre. So this has some Maryland-grown Vidal Blanc grapes, a little bit of Moscato to soften it. This is going to be your tropical vanilla fruit-flavored wine. This is perfect for summertime, a nice refreshing white. The label features Kilgore Falls. It's a great day trip. It's a 5-minute drive from the winery. It's right in Rock State Park, another great Harford County spot. Our most popular wine is the Scarlet. Now this is a Concord grape wine. It features the Lighthouse from Havre de Grace, and this is just your grapey, jam, everyday kind of wine. It's perfect for everything. It's just a great drinkable wine. And lastly, we have the Boardwalk Blush. So this is a blend of several different things we grow here at the winery. This is your cherry, very sweet, a little white grape flavor if you're familiar with a white grape juice. It's really nice and pleasant. You can have it with spicy food, and it's great also chilled for the summertime.
In 1894, Isaac Heck opened a hotel in Havre de Grace, advertising his bar was stocked with the finest whiskeys, brandies, and wines, as well as beer on draft, and in Heck's registered bottles, which were likely filled from kegs of beer. Another bottler of beer under his own name was George H. Burroughs, who in 1895 was operating the Spencer House Hotel on Washington Street. Both of these bottles from Havre de Grace are shown courtesy of Pete Whiteford. In 1905, R. Ellis Thompson of Baltimore established what was called a hot air bottling works in the Salic building at the corner of Erie Street and Water Street in Havre de Grace, just south of the Canal Basin. Using a horse-drawn wagon, he delivered carbonated soft drinks and seltzer water to individuals in the general area. By 1907, however, Thompson had decided to retire and sold the business.
The Hot Air Bottling Works was acquired by Edgar C. Kelly, who in 1907 had established his bottling operation on the corner of Strawberry Alley and Lewis Street. In 1920, Kelly acquired from the Crown Cork and Seal Company in Baltimore their first production model of a machine for filling and capping bottles that was called the Dixie Automatic. Heretofore, bottling and sealing had been done by hand, thus being labor-intensive and time-consuming. With automation, it became easier to introduce other varieties such as squeeze, ginger ale, sarsaparilla, lemon soda, cream soda, new grape, cherry blossom, peach whip, and what was dubbed as the new refreshment, mit chi. Beginning with a 9-month period in 1920, Kelly filled and capped 625,000 bottles of soft drink, with annual production increasing to more than 1 million over the next several years. In 1927, the bottling works moved into new facilities located at 600 South Washington Street in Havre de Grace. Kelly died in 1937, and his heirs reorganized the company into a corporation. And by 1942, the bottling works was producing Dove L Value Orange and products for Pepsi-Cola. Still existing today in the collection of Pete Whiteford are 2 bottles with the Kelly name and logo.
The first occupant of Kelly's soft drink facility at 600 South Washington Street, however, was the Whistle Bottling Company. This popular orange-flavored drink had been formulated by Charles Leiper Grigg and introduced in the St. Louis metropolitan area by Vess Soda Company. Grigg went on to invent a soda called Vess Up, and one that is still sold today called 7-Up. Whistle found its way into Havre de Grace in 1919. They advertised over the years with clever slogans such as "Thirsty? Just whistle," and "It will wet your whistle." It was indeed a popular soft drink, as the Havre de Grace Republican in May 1925 reported that a whistle dealer sold 161 cases of the drink at a school event in Bel Air, which amounted to 3,864 bottles. The whistle manufacturing plant at 600 South Washington Street was their location, which was later occupied by the Kelly Bottling Company.
In 1918, Captain Hiram Stanley received a franchise from Coca-Cola Company to establish a bottling plant that would serve Harford and Cecil counties. He chose Havre de Grace for a central location, and by 1920 he was filling and sealing Coke bottles with a foot press and delivering products to stores with a single Ford truck. A few years later, by the early 1920s, he had installed power presses and during peak demand was supplying 1,500 cases each day. In 1923, he sold the operation to Colonel J.C. Hedditch, who 2 years later moved the plant from Franklin Street in Havre de Grace to Juniata, where he constructed a new facility. About the same time, the Colonel introduced two new drinks called Good Grape and Orange Crush. The product line continued to grow, as by 1927, ginger ale, sarsaparilla, root beer, birch beer, lemon soda, cream soda, and a non-carbonated chocolate drink called Mavis found their way into the bottling plant. 3 years later, in 1930, Cinderella Orange, described as the fairy drink, was added to the list. Colonel Hedditch died in 1944, and J. Cecil Sale was appointed plant manager. He made many modern automation improvements, and the business grew. By 1953, there was a fleet of 18 delivery trucks moving Coke product throughout Harford and Cecil counties.
Pepsi-Cola got its start in Havre de Grace in 1942 when the Kelly Beverage Company began to bottle their products. In 1944, the Chesapeake and Potomac Telephone Directory, under the heading of Beverages and Soft Drinks, carried an advertisement for Kelly at 600 South Washington Street, identifying Pepsi-Cola as one of their products. By 1959, the telephone directory listed Pepsi-Cola with its own bottling plant on Old Post Road. Pepsi-Cola operations in Havre de Grace continued at least until 1991, as evidenced by an article in the Baltimore Sun that reported the soft drink company was surviving a downturn in the economy.
On June 23, 1916, Alexander M. Fulford Jr. and Frank B. Fulford, owners of a 2.5-story stone cottage in Bel Air at what is now 20 Fulford Avenue, leased their facility to the Fulford Hickman Bottling Company. Claude D. Hickman was the president of this incorporated entity, which was established to manufacture and transport carbonated beverages that would be marketed and sold under the brand name of Lord Calvert. Today, Lord Calvert Canadian whiskey, named for the founding fathers of Maryland, is still available, but its cobwebbed carbonated cousin completely collapsed about 2 years later when, on September 13, 1918, receiver Frank H. Jacobs advertised for sale their 1-ton delivery truck. Today, this charming stone building, sometimes referred to by old-timers as the Honeymoon Cottage, is home of Wackenfuss Candies.
Kentucky is known for its bourbon, Tennessee for its Jack Daniel's Sour Mash whiskey, and Maryland, especially Baltimore and its environs, for Pikesville Rye. A much less known brand, first distilled in Aberdeen and later in Havre de Grace, was whiskey produced by the Harford Pure Rye Distilleries. It was established in 1935 on the former site of an old textile mill.
In 1894, Andrew Lincoln Lyon and Edward Zeitler opened a drugstore on what is now 328 St. John Street in Havre de Grace, where Lyon's Pharmacy still exists today. The partnership, however, was short-lived, and 1 year later, Lyon took over the business, having received a diploma from the Maryland College of Pharmacy. By 1926, Lyon had developed cataracts in both eyes, prompting him to turn the business over to his sons, G. Taylor Lyon and A. Tolson Lyon. One son, Tolson, would later open a drugstore in Elkton, Maryland. Some of the store's bottles are shown courtesy of Pete Whiteford. The elder Lyon died in 1942 at the age of 76, having been much beloved by everyone that he had an opportunity to meet. He graciously greeted one and all with kind words, and when asked, provided sound advice to those seeking help. Today, the pharmacy operated by Ken Shaw under the Lyons banner still exists. After the Lyon and Zeitler partnership was dissolved, Edward Zeitler opened another drugstore at the corner of St. John Street and Franklin Street in Havre de Grace. One of his bottles with a paper label has survived and is shown courtesy of Pete Whiteford. Zeitler died at the age of 72 and was buried in Angel Hill Cemetery.
This Bel Air fixture on Main Street has been in existence since 1892, when it was owned by Henry James Boyd and Alexander Maitland Fulford. One afternoon in 1944, a 14-year-old boy, M. Eugene Street, walked in the drugstore looking for a job. He was hired and eventually acquired the business, and has been there ever since. A number of years ago, he turned the day-to-day operations over to his children, but is often found in the pharmacy chatting with the old-time customers. Gene recalls the day when printed paper labels were used on medicine bottles and took the time to discuss a number of them.
We pulled a number of labels they thought might be interesting as far as your attention is concerned. The first one we have is elixir terpene hydrate and codeine, which I'm sure most of the people have known somewhere in their lifetime. It was a clear, it's very slightly amber in color, very bitter in tasting, but very, very effective as far as a cough syrup is concerned. Probably primarily because it contained codeine, which is more or less a sedative-like effect. But it is no longer on the market and has been discontinued in all of the familiar formularies. The second we have to look at, just for interest's sake, is boric acid. Most people today know boric acid. In the old days, everybody knew boric acid. It is a white crystalline, which is used in what is referred to as a saturated solution. The saturated solution usually was diluted by 50% and used as a topical wash for cuts and abrasions, and then even reduced farther, and it was used as an ear irrigation for wax in the ear. Then we have another one, which is a very familiar one, especially to farmers who grew hogs or pigs, whichever you want to call them, on a farm, saltpeter. Everybody jokingly knows that name. Saltpeter was sold primarily to the farmers in the fall of the year when they did their butchering, and then they rubbed the meat and the hams down with that, and that was a preservative. And it was salty in taste, like regular salt, but most effective in preserving the meat. Then we have another one which is seldom ever seen or heard of anymore, salicylic acid. Salicylic acid is another white crystalline used primarily by mothers canning, because when you canned your beans, they were very hard to preserve even after canning them with the ball jars and the zinc lids and the rubber seals. But they put a teaspoonful in the top of each jar, and that kept the beans from souring and spoiling. Then we had another one which people still confuse, product called compound tincture of benzoin. That was used by mothers when their children had laryngitis or sore throats. They would take the tea kettle on the wood stove that they had in those days, heat it to boiling so the steam would be coming off, and they'd put a towel over the child or person's head, and they would inhale the vapors, and that would give you a coating to the back of the throat, and to the bronchial tubes in the throat, and very effective. Even to this day, they still use that. Then we had the one which so many people would love to have and used it quite frequently, called Sweet Spirit of Nitre. Has a great name, almost sounds like a Christmas something. But Sweet Spirit of Nitre was usually rather effective for mothers who had new infants and they were growing older and they were trying to stop them from bedwetting. And they knew that they could take a few drops of this in some sweetened water and give it to the children, and it would control bedwetting at nighttime. Today you have to spend big bucks to get the proper medicine to do something like that. Then again, for the children that were sick, camphorated oil. Camphorated oil was even used by my mother or me when you had swollen glands in your neck and you had a cold, and they say, oh, you've got swollen glands. And they would rub that on your neck 2 or 3 times a day, and it would seem to take the swelling down, at least made you feel much better. Then we had another one called Epsom salts. Epsom salts, or magnesium sulfate, was used quite extensively in the old days, because remember, in the days that these were being used, there was no money in Harford County. There was just no money to be had. So you used whatever you had, and hopefully that could be used for many different things at the same time. So they would use it as a soak when you had sprained a wrist or an ankle. And then if you had trouble going to the bathroom, they gave you a dose of Epsom salts water. Very saline, but very, very effective. It did a wonderful job. And then we had another one called Spirit of Turpentine. Now, in days gone before the antibiotics came on, we had to have some kind of antiseptic. And antiseptics were few and far between, and the ones that we had were rather poisonous. So they used turpentine for everything. If you cut yourself, you got a roll of turpentine on there. If you, for some reason, pulled a nail off, you stuck your finger in the bottle, turned it up, let the turpentine go on there. So it was just a do-all, because that's what they had to use. They had to use something, so they used that one. And then another one, which is a no-no today in every household all over Baltimore City, known as sugar of lead. Now, we sold a lot of sugar of lead because people still got poison oak and poison ivy, even in those days. And if you want to cure poison ivy, the best thing to do is make a aqueous or water solution of sugar of lead, which is lead acetate, and just dab that as a wet compress on the poison ivy, and it's gone overnight virtually. But no one would use it today, it's too hazardous. And then a lot of people remember tincture of merthiolate. Remember, it was in a 1 ounce bottle, had an applicator rod to it, it was red, it would sting when you put it on. But today, the original tincture of merthiolate is not available. The one we used back then had mercury in it, and that was a no-no, a heavy metal, as they all say. So they discontinued that. It can be purchased under the name of merthiolate, but it is not the original merthiolate that we had. And they tell me it doesn't burn and sting like it used to either.
In 1885, medical doctor Charles A. Hollingsworth assumed the proprietorship of the Bel Air drugstore located at the corner of Main Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. He pledged to keep on hand the purest and best drugs, along with patent medicine, toilet articles, fine cigars, and tobacco products. And one of his bottles is shown, courtesy of Jean Street. Dr. Hollingsworth was a druggist until January 1888, at which time he got out of the pharmacy business and resumed his medical practice.
The Edel and Company drugstore was established about 1896 at Old Post Road and Bel Air Avenue in what is now known as Aberdeen. Dr. Eugene Dell and Dr. T.A. Cronin, a dentist, were partners, and by 1906 they had moved their pharmacy to a new location on West Bel Air Avenue. After Dr. Dell's death, the drugstore was operated by Dr. Murray L. Hopkins, shown at the left, from 1909 to 1922, at which time Dr. Rudolph Sprang, at the right, became a partner. All of the images shown are courtesy of John Livesey, a volunteer at the Aberdeen Room Archives and Museum.
Another Aberdeen drugstore that was also located on Bel Air Avenue was operated by Dr. Harry O. Ivins. In 1900, it began as a general store and later transitioned to a drugstore, which was destroyed by a fire in 1918. It was rebuilt as a pharmacy and ice cream parlor and was run by Dr. Ivins until his death in 1949. The business was continued by his wife Edna and his son John until 1965, when it was sold to Green's Pharmacy of Havre de Grace.
When it comes to sheer quantity, locally bottled milk from Harford County cows is without a doubt the most voluminous product. The individual most responsible for keeping this history alive is Pete Whiteford of northern Harford County, whose outstanding collection of milk bottles and related artifacts visually tells the story. Pete provides us a pleasurable preview.
I'm a milk bottle collector. I collect Maryland milk bottles, which there's over 1,060 different Maryland milk bottles, and I have 730, 40, 50. I just don't have the exact count. And you can see on the walls of all the different ones that I have. One of the first things that we have to go with is a farmer sat on a milk stool and milked by hand. And later on, they had milking machines that they put on the cow. But the early ones milked by hand, they took the milk and run it through strainers into milk cans. And they had to go from the milk cans, it had to be cooled, so they took it to the spring house, which was usually down over the hill, because all small farms had to have spring water to cool the milk. If it went to Baltimore, they had machines to fill the bottles, but this is called a handheld milk filler. They put milk in this and put it down in the bottle, which would have been an area, and when they pushed down on it, this would come up and let a certain amount of milk till you pull it up, and that's the way you hand fed the milk bottles. It couldn't have been very many because it doesn't hold that much milk, and I have a feeling that anyone that used one of these, they probably had, I'm guessing, maybe a couple dozen bottles of milk, and that would have been it. And once you got the milk in the bottle, they had the small caps that were put down in the bottle, and they actually had a thing you put them in and snap the cap down on it. But I've talked to people who said that they were actually put on by hand. But the guy told me before they could put that cap on, they had to take each individual cap and dip it in bleach water so that it was perfectly safe.
Thanks for watching this program that highlighted products which were made and bottled in Harford County.
Please keep watching this channel for more presentations that address the rich and wonderful history of Harford's heritage.